Today, I'll tell you a story so tragic and powerful, it proves that sometimes the deadliest weapon isn't a gun, but a lie. It takes place in the American West, where wind howls through empty valleys, and the line between justice and vengeance is razor thin. This is where grief hardens into hatred, and one woman finds herself standing at the crossroads of truth and bloodshed. It all began with a small act of curiosity, opening an old trunk, turning a single page, an act that would uncover a buried crime and set an unstoppable chain of events into motion. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. It's a reminder that on the frontier, the deadliest threats were not always the rattlesnakes hidden in tall grass or the storms rolling down from the high ridges. More often, the real danger came from lies, especially the ones spoken by those we trusted most. Folks like to say frontier stories begin with gunfire, a dying horse, or a man pushed past his breaking point. But Elira Vexen's story did not begin with violence. It began with silence. It began with dust settling slowly over an old cedar trunk, heavy and still, like soil falling onto a grave marker. Ever since her parents were laid beneath Wyoming's hard, unyielding earth, the ranch house seemed frozen in time, caught in an afternoon without wind. The air that day felt thick, pressing inward against the walls. Grief has a way of changing how a home breathes, doesn't it? After her parents' burial, the corners of every room felt colder, as if warmth itself had fled. Something vital had been hollowed out of the ranch. As though the heart had been carved from its beams and stone, Elira found herself standing in the storage room, lantern trembling slightly in her hand, an unnamed ache tightening in her chest, her eyes fixed on the trunk. She had never planned to open it. It had belonged to her father, Valor Vexen, a man remembered by the town as stern but fair. He was the sort who worked from first light to dusk, a man who locked his grief behind his ribs where no one could touch it. Now he was gone, and the silence he left behind pressed in on her, heavy and accusing. Driven by something she couldn't name, Elira knelt and lifted the lid, the hinges groaning in protest. The smell inside was unmistakable: old wool, dust, and the weight of memory. There was a folded blanket, a rusted branding iron that had marked cattle for decades, and beneath them lay something smaller. A worn book, bound in cracked brown leather, fragile and overlooked. She should have closed the trunk. She should have left the past buried. Instead, she opened it. The first pages were harmless enough. Ordinary entries. Routine ranch notes, horse trades, feed prices climbing, taxes paid under the Vexen name. The handwriting was her father's, measured, steady, honest. But as Elira turned deeper into the pages, the ink began to change. The script sharpened, grew aggressive. The pen had been pressed so hard it scarred the paper, carving words instead of writing them. Her scalp tightened with recognition. She knew this hand. These pages were not Vylor's. They belonged to her brother, Rothik Vexen. Her gaze followed crude sketches in the margins. A narrow canyon, its ridgeline drawn with unsettling precision. Beside the drawings were frantic notes in Rothik's jagged scrawl. Elira read, and her breath caught. Gold vein thick as a man's wrist. Then another line. Mailer Kryn, to supply rifles. And then the words that made the ground seem to tilt beneath her feet. Territory must be cleared. The phrase lingered in the air like a curse. Her hands shook as she turned the page. Dates, ammunition counts, a brutal outline for a night assault, plans to erase the Apache settlement that had lived in that canyon long before the Vexen family ever arrived. Elira shut her eyes, nausea rising. She had grown up on this land. She knew the Apache were not pests to be crushed. No one on the frontier was. Over the years, she had spoken with them at trading posts, exchanging herbs, soap. Once, she had even shared a ribbon with a shy Apache girl. They were not monsters, despite what stories claimed. They were people. And here, in Unforgiving ink, was proof that her own brother was planning their extermination. But the book held something darker still. Elira forced herself onward. The next page nearly slipped from her hands. A note from Rothick, written in fury so fresh it felt wet. "They killed our parents. I'll make them choke on that debt." Her hands trembled uncontrollably now. This was the story Rothick Vexen had repeated throughout their entire childhood. He told it in a voice sharpened by bitterness, usually after long nights when whiskey turned his grief into a weapon. He told it to the town. He told it to Elira, and most of all, he told it to himself, that the Apache were the ones who had murdered their mother and father. But as Elira stared at the crude plans for gold extraction and rifle shipments tied to Maler Kryn, the past began to rearrange itself inside her mind. She had always sensed something was wrong with Rothick's version of events. She remembered the day their parents were found near the abandoned mine shaft. There had been no Apache weapons left behind. No tracks from unshod ponies, no signs of a tribal raid. Back then, the sheriff had whispered other possibilities: claim jumpers, smugglers, a dispute over landlines that turned violent. But Rothick never listened. He didn't want answers. He needed an enemy. His grief was too vast, too jagged to carry on its own, so he aimed it at someone else. He had twisted the tragedy of Valor and Erison Vexen's deaths into a convenient lie, one that justified stealing land rich with gold, land the Apache had called home long before the ranch ever existed. He wasn't honoring their parents' memory. He was using it to feed his hunger. Elira stood frozen in the dim storage room, the grave-bound codex burning in her hands. The ranch was no longer silent. It pulsed with the weight of truth she could no longer ignore. She realized then that the brother she thought she knew, the man meant to lead their family, had been preparing a war built entirely on a lie. And as that realization settled deep into her bones, the sound came. The back door slammed. Heavy boots crossed the kitchen floor, their rhythm impatient and familiar. Rothick was home, and Elira was standing there, holding the one thing that could destroy him. The door didn't just open. It crashed inward like a judge's gavel. Elira stiffened, her heart pounding hard against her ribs. She knew that walk. The arrogant, deliberate pace of a man who believed the ground owed him space. Rothick Vexen filled the doorway of the storage room, late afternoon light catching the dust on his coat. Even from across the room, Elira could smell him. Stale trail dust, horse sweat, and the sharp sweetness of whiskey. Beneath it all lingered something harder to define, but impossible to miss. Entitlement. His eyes, usually a pale, drifting blue, narrowed the moment they landed on the book in her hands, the leather-bound, grave-bound codex. "What are you doing?" he asked. His voice was low, coiled tight like a rattlesnake ready to strike. "That trunk ain't yours." Elira swallowed hard. Fear surged through her, but the truth she carried had stiffened her spine. She looked at the brother she had cooked for, stitched clothes for, and mourned beside. "Why?" she asked, her voice shaking but steady. "Why the rifles? Why Maler Kryn? Why attack the Apache?" Rothick's jaw tightened. For a long, suffocating moment, he said nothing. Then he stepped toward her. With every stride, the room seemed to shrink, the air thinning. "You weren't supposed to see that," he said, not with regret, but accusation. "Answer me," Elira pressed, clutching the grave-bound codex to her chest like a shield. They're the reason Ma and Pa are dead, he spat, the words firing out like bullets. You think I'm just going to sit back while those savages sit on what's ours? He gestured wildly, control slipping. That gold should have kept this ranch alive for generations. Elira stared at him, truly seeing him for the first time in years. Gold, she whispered. You're talking about murder, Rothick. About slaughtering families, women, children, all for a vein of gold in a canyon. His eyes flared with fury. And there it was, the sickness Elira had always feared, finally stripping away its disguise. You still don't understand, do you? Rothick hissed, stepping closer until her space vanished. His shadow swallowed her whole. Everything we lost, our land, our parents, our future, it all leads back to them. And if you'd quit being so damn soft, you'd see it, too. No, Elira whispered. She lifted the grave-bound codex, her hands trembling. I see something else. Her voice steadied. I see the truth. I see that you, and Maylor Kryn, are the monsters here. This is wrong. This is evil. Rothick's face hardened, turning to stone. Maylor warned me you were weak, he muttered. He moved before she could step back. Before she could run, he lunged. The grave-bound codex struck the floor with a dull thud. Elira's arm slammed into the wall as she tried to escape. She never stood a chance. In one violent motion, Rothick seized her wrists. His grip was merciless, iron-tight, bruising her in instantly. You want the truth? He growled, his face inches from hers, whiskey burning hot on his breath. Fine. You know too damn much. Terror ripped through her, cold, sharp, but Elira refused to cry. She would not give him that victory. Rothick, she said, her voice shaking. Don't do this. We're family. Family no longer mattered, not with gold tipping the scales. He had already decided. He dragged her through the house, her boots scraping helplessly across the floorboards. He hauled her outside into the fading afternoon heat, the sun stretching long, warped shadows across the dirt yard. He threw her onto the horse like a sack of grain, ignoring her pleas, then swung up behind her. He rode hard, not toward town, not toward neighbors. He turned instead toward the Badlands, the dead stretch locals called the Devil's Anvil. The world blurred past Elira's eyes, sand, sagebrush, distant ridges drowning in heat shimmer. With every mile, the land grew harsher. Gentle hills fell away into jagged stone and unforgiving dust. Nothing lived there unless it fought for water. It was a land of silence and bones. At last, Rothick stopped beside a lone cottonwood baked white by the sun, standing in miles of emptiness. Its branches twisted skyward like skeletal fingers begging for rain. He dragged Elira down. Her legs buckled with fear. He offered no help. From his saddlebag, he pulled a rope, the same coarse hemp he used on stubborn cattle, and shoved her against the trunk. The bark bit into her back. She watched, stunned, as her own brother wrapped the rope around her body, binding her tight to the dead wood. The fibers cut into her skin, burning her wrists raw. "Please," she gasped. "You can't leave me here!" He finished the knot with practiced cruelty, yanking it tight. Then he stepped back, inspecting his work. Not like a brother, like a problem finally solved. "Maybe the sun will teach you something," he said coldly. He climbed back into the saddle, looking down at her. "Teach me what?" Elira cried, tears finally breaking free. "Loyalty," he replied. "Blood. Choosing the right side." The wind whipped her hair across her face. "Family doesn't do this," she shouted. For the briefest heartbeat, doubt flickered in Rothick's eyes. Regret. Then the mask slammed back into place. "You'll thank me in the afterlife," he muttered. He spurred his horse and rode away, back toward the ranch, back toward his gold. Elira watched him vanish into the red haze, her breath shuddering, her heart pounding wildly against the ropes. The desert swallowed the sound of his departure. Vast, indifferent. She was alone, bound to a dead tree in the heart of the devil's anvil. And as the sun sank low, painting the sky in bruised reds and purples, Elira understood something terrible. The darkness wasn't just coming for the land, it was coming for her. Night in the desert is merciless. It steals heat from your body and hope from your soul, leaving only the endless silence of the stars. She had never known sand could grow so cold. The chill sank deep, settling into her bones as the moon climbed above the jagged ridge, washing the devil's anvil in silver and blue. Her lips split from thirst. Her wrists burned where the rope bit deep. She struggled for an hour until her arms went numb, but the knots Rothick had tied were meant for wild horses. Tight, cruel, patient. Time stretched into lifetimes. The wind rose and fell like the breathing of some ancient creature beneath the earth. A lone coyote cried somewhere in the distance, its call tightening her spine. Thirst came not as dryness, but as pain, sharp as broken glass in her throat. Her thoughts drifted, brushing the edge of unconsciousness. And there, in the dark, Elira made herself a promise. She might die here. She might bleach into bones beneath that cottonwood. But she would not carry a lie into death. Not her brother's lie, not any lie. If this was the end, Elira would meet it carrying the truth of the grave-bound codex burned into her heart. She was barely conscious when a sound brushed the edge of the night. Hoofbeats. Elira stiffened, fear slicing through her exhaustion. She knew the sound of Rothick's riding, hard, furious, punishing, heavy strikes that beat the ground into submission, much like the man himself. But these hoofbeats were different. They were steady, quiet, intentional. They didn't fight the earth. They moved with it. Elira held her breath. From the darkness, a rider stepped into the spill of moonlight. He wore a buckskin shirt, and his horse carried itself with the calm certainty of something born to this harsh land. Moonlight traced high cheekbones and caught the sheen of black braids falling past his shoulders. Even before he spoke, Elira knew who he was. For a long moment, he didn't move. He simply studied her. His eyes were dark as cooled obsidian. No hatred there, no triumph. Only a deep, assessing stillness, as if he were weighing the soul of the woman bound to the tree. When he dismounted, he moved like water, fluid, silent, deliberate. He crouched beside her, the scent of smoke and juniper clinging to his clothes, a smell that reminded Elira of canyon winds and hidden springs. "You should not still be breathing," he said quietly. His voice was low, steady, shaped by listening rather than schooling. The desert does not spare many. She tried to answer, but only dry air scraped her throat. He reached into a pouch at his belt and drew out a small gourd flask. He didn't simply offer it. He lifted her chin with unexpected gentleness and brought the mouth to her lips. "Slow," he murmured. "Too fast will make you sick." The first drop touched her tongue like mercy. Cool, clean, life-saving. She gasped, desperate for more, but he controlled the flow. Only when she nodded did he allow another sip. Then a third. "Better," he said. He set the flask aside and examined the rope at her wrists. His brow furrowed. Not with anger at her, but disbelief. "Your own people did this?" Her voice returned, cracked and fragile. "Yes." She swallowed painfully, meeting his eyes. "Because I know the truth." That answer mattered. He didn't ask what truth. He didn't demand proof. He drew a knife from his boot, bone-handled, polished smooth by years of use, and sliced through the rope. The tension vanished. Elira sagged, her legs giving way. She didn't fall. He caught her easily, steadying her weight. For a moment she leaned against him, too weak to stand, too overwhelmed to pull back. A stranger, an enemy, according to her brother. Yet his arms were the only thing keeping her upright. "You cannot stay here," he said. "Not another hour." Her vision swam as she blinked up at him. Who are you?" "Cain," he replied simply. She knew the name. Everyone did. The youngest Apache ever named a leader, said to read the land like scripture itself. He guided her toward his horse, moving to lift her into the saddle. Then the night shattered. A branch snapped in the dark. Cain froze. His hand slid instantly to the knife at his hip. Then came the unmistakable metallic click of a rifle being cocked. A familiar voice followed, sharp with triumph and poison. "There you are." 4 men stepped into the moonlight, flanking Rothic Vexen. Rifles raised, lanterns swinging, casting their faces into pale, ghostly masks. Beside Rothic stood men Elira recognized, the Iron Wake men, hired killers loyal to Maelor Kryn. Rothic hadn't left her to die. He had come back to finish it. He moved fully into view, eyes burning with something feral, part fury, part desperation. "Get your hands off my sister," he snarled. "You Apache bastard." Cain didn't react to the insult. He didn't move, except to shift his stance, placing himself squarely between Elira and the rifles aimed her way. He became a living shield. Elira's heart slammed against her ribs. "Rothic, stop, please! It's over!" "Over?" Rothic laughed, the sound like dry leaves snapping. "You think running off with one of them ends anything? You're coming home. We're going to fix your head." "No," Elira said, surprised by the strength in her own voice. "I'm not." His face twisted. "They've poisoned you, turned you against your blood." He raised his rifle, not at her, at Cain's chest. "Move," Rothic barked, "or I'll move you." Cohen didn't flinch. "She needs water, medicine. If you take her now, she will die." "Not my concern," Rothic spat. The moment stretched. Thin, silent, unbearable. The world seemed to hold its breath. Elira saw Rothic's finger tighten on the trigger. "No!" she screamed. Coin moved before the thought finished forming. He shoved Elira hard behind the horse, throwing his own body fully into the line of fire. The rifle thundered. The muzzle flash tore through the darkness like a bolt of lightning. Elira heard the sickening impact as the bullet ripped through cloth and flesh. Khan staggered, the round grazing his shoulder. But he did not fall. Chaos exploded. With one arm, Coin seized the reins and vaulted onto the horse in a single fluid motion, blood already spreading across his buckskin. Ignoring the pain, he reached back and dragged Elira up behind him with raw, desperate strength. "Hold on," he ordered. He drove his heel into the horse's side. Hooves clawed at the sand, sending rocks and dust flying as they surged away from the cottonwood. Gunshots cracked again behind them, tearing through the night as they raced through brush and scattered stone. Rothic shouted for his men to pursue, but Cain veered suddenly, taking a path only someone born to that land would dare, forcing the horse into a narrow wash squeezed between leaning canyon walls. They plunged into darkness. The shouts faded, swallowed by the twisting black maze ahead. The canyon closed around them, its depths dangerous and absolute. Elira pressed her face against Coin's back, feeling the heat of his body and the hard, relentless rhythm of his heart. She was leaving everything behind, riding into the unknown with a man she had been taught to fear. And for the first time in her life, she felt terrifyingly, painfully awake. Dawn crept across the desert like a slow-burning fire, painting the canyon maze in bruised purples and copper. Elira drifted in and out of consciousness through the endless night, her weight resting against Cohen's steady frame as his horse carried them deeper into country no map from Valor Vexen's trunk had ever dared to name. When awareness finally returned, it came gently, an aching tide rather than a crash. The first thing she noticed was the smell. She expected blood, dust, heat. Instead, the air was sweet, sage smoke, roasted pine nuts, and the cool promise of living water. Elira opened her eyes. The desert was gone. Below them lay a hidden valley cradled between stone bluffs shaped by centuries of wind, the stronghold of the Black Drift. She had grown up hearing stories about places like this, stories told by men like Rothick, stories that painted these camps as savage nests of chaos. But what she saw was order. Lodges of tanned hides stood in a wide circle, solid and grounded. Smoke rose from morning fires in thin blue ribbons. Horses grazed along a creek that wound through the valley like a silver thread. Children ran through tall grass, laughter riding the breeze. Women worked stone and grain with calm, practiced movements. It was a home. It carried a quiet strength, belonging woven into earth and sky in a way Elira, despite her years on the ranch, had never known. But as Cain guided the horse down into the valley, the peace shattered. A shout split the air. Warriors emerged from between the lodges, boughs raised, braids snapping in the wind like warnings. The atmosphere turned brittle in an instant. Their eyes moved from Cain, their leader, to the pale woman slumped behind him. The welcome died. A tall warrior stepped forward, chest broad, face marked with red ochre. Irek. He carried an ashwood bow, and his stare cut sharp as glass. "Cain," he demanded, disbelief roughening his voice. "What is this? Why bring her here?" Cohen kept his grip on Elira's arm as he helped her down, steadying her when her legs buckled. "She was left to die by her own," he said. His voice was calm, but it carried across the gathering crowd. "I could not leave her." "That is not our concern," Irek growled, stepping closer, tension rolling off him in waves. "White folk bring death. Always." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the Black Drift. Elira felt their judgment settle on her shoulders. To them, she was not a survivor. She was a warning, the face of those who had stolen land and slaughtered buffalo. Then the crowd parted. An older woman stepped forward, her hair a flowing river of gray threaded with turquoise. Her eyes were sharp as hawk feathers. Sova, the tribe's medicine woman. She studied Elira carefully, taking in the torn dress, the raw wrists, the exhaustion etched into her bones. Her lips were split from thirst. Angry red welts circled her wrists where the rope had chewed into flesh. Sova did not soften her expression. "Trouble," she declared. The word struck the ground with weight. "She knows something," Cohen said, stepping forward, placing himself between Elira and the tribe's judgment. "Something that could protect us." Sova snorted, unimpressed. Still, she gestured sharply. Two young women moved in, lifting Elira carefully. "Bring her to my lodge. I will tend the wounds." Then Sova fixed Cain with a hard stare. "Hear me. If she draws danger into our home, the blood will be on your hands." "I accept that," Cain said. There was no hesitation in his voice. Elira saw it clearly. He was wagering his authority, his honor, perhaps his life, on her. Inside Sova's lodge, the air was heavy with crushed juniper and smoke. The medicine woman worked with swift, practical hands, washing Elira's wrists with warm water while muttering under her breath in Apache. The words were sharp, but her touch was steady. "You fought the rope," Sova observed, tracing the deep abrasions. "Yes," Elira said through clenched teeth as salve burned into raw skin. "Out of fear." "Fear keeps the living alive," Sova replied. "Sometimes it wears the same face as courage." She wrapped the wounds in soft elk hide. "You will heal, but listen well. Many here do not forgive easily. Pain does not disappear because someone regrets causing it." "I'm not asking forgiveness," Elira said, her voice gaining strength. "Only the chance to do what's right." Sova paused, studying her. "We will see. Words are light. Spirit is heavy." The day slipped past in waves of pain and exhaustion. When evening came, painting the valley in muted lavender and gray, Elira needed air that did not smell of medicine. She stepped outside, moving slowly, every muscle aching. The creek welcomed her with quiet song, water slipping over smooth stone, indifferent to human conflict. She knelt, splashing cool water onto her face, washing away the last of the desert dust. "You should be resting." The voice didn't startle her. It felt like it belonged to the land itself. She looked up. Coin stood nearby. His shirt had been changed, but the thick bandage beneath the buckskin marked the wound he had taken for her. He did not loom. He simply was. He sat on a flat stone, watching the water. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Tired," Elira said, "but alive, because of you." He shook his head. "Because the desert chose not to claim you." Silence settled between them. Easy, shared. Crickets sang. The village breathed as night took hold. It was the quiet of two people who had stood in darkness and survived. Elira studied him, the fatigue in his eyes, the invisible weight pressing on his shoulders. He was risking everything by sheltering her. Guilt tightened her chest. "I heard what Irek said," she murmured. "They think I'll bring blood to your people." Kain met her gaze. "They are afraid. Fear sharpens suspicion." "Maybe they're right," Elira said, looking down at her bandaged wrists. "My brother won't stop. He's coming." Cain leaned forward, eyes locking onto hers. Danger was already coming. His voice was low, certain. "Men like Rothik Vexen, men like Maler Kryn, they don't need reasons, only openings." He paused, his expression softening. "You did not bring the storm. You showed us where to look." The words stayed with her. He didn't see her as a burden, or a trespasser, or something fragile to protect. He saw her as the spark. Warmth stirred beneath Elira's ribs, nothing to do with heat. She saw his strength, his restraint, his quiet resolve. A man who measured honor not by blood, but by action. "I don't want your people to suffer because of me," she whispered. Cain stood and stepped closer. The cooling air carried his warmth. "And I won't let you suffer for choosing truth." He didn't touch her. No embrace. No claim. Yet the connection was undeniable. Two lives from opposing worlds aligned by honesty. In his eyes, Elira saw the woman she wanted to become. Brave, unbroken, free. And in hers, Cain saw something he had nearly stopped believing in. "Rest," he said gently. "Tomorrow will be difficult. We must prepare." He turned toward the council fire, leaving Elira by the creek, her heart beating in a rhythm she had never known. She was still an outsider here. But as she watched him walk away, one truth settled with absolute clarity. She was no longer alone. The storm came quietly, without thunder. It came wrapped in dust, a choking wall rolling across the horizon, thrown up by pounding hooves and the grinding wheels of a killing machine. The afternoon sun slanted low across the red canyon walls when the black drift scouts came running back into the valley. They didn't need to speak. Terror lived plainly in their eyes. Rothick Vexen was not coming alone with hired rifles. He was bringing a Gatling gun, a weapon meant to cut men down like grass. And worse still, he wasn't riding only with killers. Behind the Iron Wake men rode the Sable Run folk, shopkeepers, ranchers, men Elira had known since childhood. They hadn't come out of hatred. They had come chasing a lie. They believed they were rescuing a white woman stolen by savages. They believed themselves righteous. The valley stiffened. Warriors uncovered bows. Mothers rushed children toward the caves carved deep into the stone. At the canyon mouth, Coyne stood unmoving, his face set like weathered rock. He watched the dust cloud advance like a man ready to die for land already soaked in blood. "Go to the caves," he said, not turning. "When the firing starts, this valley will become a grave." Elira looked at him, then at the warriors preparing to face a Gatling gun with bows and old Winchesters. She saw the fear in the women's eyes. "No," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it stopped Coyne cold. "They will kill you," he warned, his voice breaking with urgency. "This is for you." "They're coming because of me," Elira replied calmly, smoothing her torn dress. She reached into her satchel and drew out the worn leather grave-bound codex. "And they're coming for a lie." She met his eyes. "The only way to stop this isn't with bullets, it's with truth." Before anyone could stop her, Elira stepped forward. She walked past the line of black drift warriors, bows lowering in confusion. She left the safety of the valley and entered the open throat of the canyon, the bare strip of ground between the tribe and the advancing force. Alone. Wind whipped her hair as the riders appeared around the bend. At the front rode Rothick, his face carved into grim resolve. Beside him slouched Maylor Kryn, already wearing the look of a man who had spent gold not yet taken. When the townspeople saw Elira standing free and unharmed, confusion rippled through their ranks. Rothick yanked his reins, stopping hard. "Elira!" he shouted, his voice cracking against the canyon walls. "Get away from them! Come here!" Maylor lifted a hand, signaling the Gatling crew to hold. "Easy," he called smoothly. "Let the lady come to her senses." Elira didn't run. She stepped forward. "I'm not a captive, Rothick," she shouted. Her voice rang sharp and clear. "I'm not enchanted, and I'm not the one who's lost." Rothick's face twisted. He turned desperately to the crowd. "She's been turned against her blood. They poisoned her mind." "No!" Elira cried, shattering the lie. She raised the grave-bound codex overhead. "The only thing twisted is the story you've told for 10 years. She advanced, ignoring the rifles aimed at her chest. She looked past Rothick, straight at the townspeople, men like old McGregor and Torin Quell. "You came to avenge my parents," she called, "because Rothick told you the Apache murdered Valor and Erison Vexen." "That's right," someone shouted. "We came to save you." "You can't save anyone with a lie," Elira answered. She struck the ledger against her palm. "I found Father's records. The Apache didn't kill our parents." She met Rothick's eyes. "You did." Silence crushed the canyon. Even the horses stilled. "You and Maylor Kryn," Elira continued, her voice shaking but unbroken. "You hired the men. You staged the scene. You murdered our mother and father because they wouldn't sell this land. You sold our family's honor for gold." "She's lying!" Rothick shrieked, but his eyes darted, panic leaking through. "It's all here," Elira said. She tore a page from the ledger and let the wind carry it. Dates, payments, plans to erase the black drift so the mine could move in. She pointed. Look at him. Look at his face. And tell me I'm lying. The townspeople looked. They saw Rothick, pale and sweating. They saw Mailer, his smug grin gone, replaced by something cold and reptilian. Slowly, one by one, rifles lowered. Righteous fury drained away, replaced by horror. They understood then. This wasn't a rescue. It was a massacre for profit. Torrenquell stepped forward, voice low. Rothick, is this true? Rothick opened his mouth. Nothing came. 10 years of deceit collapsed inside him. He looked at Elira, truly looked, and saw the sister he once carried on his shoulders. He saw the truth burning in her eyes, and the fever broke. Mailer Kryn saw it too. He saw the crowd turning, his fortune slipping away, and men like Mailer Kryn do not fall quietly. Stupid girl, he snarled. He drew his revolver. Time seemed to slow until it almost stopped. Elira caught the flash of sunlight along the gun barrel. She saw the hammer draw back. She understood what was coming, her body locked in place, staring straight into death. But Rothick saw it too. For the first time in 10 years, there was no lie in him. No scheme, no calculation, only instinct. He drove his heels into the stirrups and sent his horse lunging forward, not away from danger, but straight into it. Elira! The shot exploded through the canyon like thunder. She screamed as Rothick snapped hard in the saddle. Red blossomed across his chest. He folded forward, sliding from his horse and striking the dust with a final heavy stillness. Everything broke at once. Elira ran to him, collapsing to her knees in the dirt. Behind her, Mailer Kryn tried to draw the hammer back again. He never finished. An arrow, released from Kane's bow at the canyon mouth, cut clean through the air and struck Mailer in the shoulder, hurling him backward from his horse. The Sable Run folk surged in, dragging him down, stripping the weapon from his hand. Their fury finally found the right target. But Elira saw none of it. She saw only her brother. Rothick lay in the dust, breath tearing from him in wet, uneven gasps. His blue eyes stared upward at the thin slice of sky framed by canyon walls. When he looked at her, the anger was gone. The hunger was gone. What remained was only a lost boy. I just wanted, he rasped, blood bubbling at his lips. The ranch. To be mine. Shh, Elira sobbed, pressing her hands against the wound, trying to keep his life from slipping through her fingers. I know. I'm sorry, he whispered. The light in his eyes flickered, then fixed on her face for one last heartbeat. Elira. And then he was gone. Wind moved softly through the canyon. The Gatling gun stood cold and silent. The war had ended, not by victory, but by truth, sharp enough to cut through years of lies. Elira bowed over her brother's body, her grief the only sound left in the valley. The gold still slept in the rock, but its cost had already been paid in blood. The grave-bound codex was finally closed. The quiet that followed weighed heavier than gunfire. It was a listening silence, as if the land itself waited to see what choice would be made next. Rothick Vexen lay dead in the dust, the fury drained from his face. What remained was only the boy Elira once knew. There was no triumph in his end, only the waste of a life shaped by deception. She wept, not for the man he became, but for the brother he never had the chance to be. Slowly, tension unraveled. The Sable Run folk, shamed and shaken, lowered their weapons. From among them stepped Caldria Moss, the town's steady voice since the sheriff's death. Her hair was gray, her posture firm, but as she looked at Elira kneeling in the dust, regret softened her features. She turned to Cain. No flags were raised. Only a tired nod passed between two leaders who had buried too many. "We will not return," Caldria said. "This land belongs to those who understand it. You have my word." Cain met her gaze, his hand resting on his bow, but not drawing it. "We accept peace," he answered. And for the first time in a generation, the valley exhaled. That evening, beneath a sky rinsed clean by sunset, the council gathered. Torches flickered, shadows dancing along the lodge walls. This time, the circle did not feel like judgment. It felt like belonging. Cohen stood before his people, steady and unbroken. "The path existed before she arrived," he said. "Her truth only revealed what was already fractured." Even Irek, who had once rejected her presence, inclined his head. The elders spoke quietly. When they finished, the choice was placed before Elira. "You may return to your ranch," Sova told her, "or you may remain." Elira looked around the fire. Faces that had turned from strangers into shields within 2 days. She thought of the empty house, the silence, the ghosts. Then she looked at Cain. "I choose to stay," she said. Later that night, Cain guided her along a narrow path overlooking the valley. At its peak stood an ancient juniper, its twisted branches lifted toward the stars. Stone rings lay beneath it, old as memory. "This is where we speak to the ancestors," Cain said softly. "It is a place of promises." Wind moved through pine-scented air. The land settled around Elira, grounding her. Cain removed a small woven band from his wrist and placed it in her palm. "It means protection," he said, "and choice." Her heart beat steady and sure. In return, Elira tore a thin strip of white cloth from her dress, plain and honest, and tied it to a low branch. It fluttered gently in the night breeze. "A promise?" Cain asked. She stepped closer. "A promise to live in truth," Elira said, lifting her eyes to meet his. "With you, if you'll have me." "I chose you the moment I cut your ropes," Cain answered, his voice raw with feeling. "Everything after was just time catching up." The land seemed to fall away around them, quiet settling in, darkness wrapping close, the blessing of an ancient people holding them steady. Cain took her hand. There was no fear, no doubt, only the calm recognition of two hearts that had survived the storm to arrive at the same place. "My house is empty," Elira murmured, resting her head against his chest. "But my heart is here." She had come searching for the truth of her past, and found the promise of her future instead. In the canyon's shadow, beneath stars that kept their watch, Elira Vexen finally found home. And that, my friends, brings us to the end of Elira and Cain's journey. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening and for allowing this story to speak to your heart. The Wild West still holds countless truths, some painful, some tender, all worth remembering. Stay with us, subscribe, comment, and invite others to discover these untamed stories. From our hearts to yours, thank you for being part of this journey. Aviso legal. Disclaimer. Each story shared here is produced for storytelling enjoyment. Certain scenes may include fictional or dramatized elements inspired by historical circumstances. Although AI tools assist us in visuals, narration, and script development, the emotional tone, editing, and quality control are conducted by people to ensure meaningful experiences. We fully uphold YouTube's policies, using no deceptive recreations or impersonations of real individuals. All creative resources are properly licensed. Unauthorized copying, re-uploading, or remixing is not permitted. Thank you for supporting the effort behind every episode we create.